Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Hungry for More, How to Get the Most Out of Life, brought to you by the Center for Christian Life Enrichment, and part of our webinar series, The ABCs of CLE. Today is Wednesday, October the 10th, and you are reaching us at 11:30 in the morning Central Standard Time. And we're so glad that you chose to join us today. And in just a second, the founder and clinical director of the Center for Christian Life Enrichment, Rich Blue, will be sharing with you his tips and his journey about living a life of more. But before we get to that, I want to tell you a little bit about our practice. We are located in the northern suburbs of Chicago, Northbrook to be exact, and between our 6 therapists on staff, we have over 55 years of clinical experience as well as over a decade of graduate education. We're an emotionally focused counseling practice, and we also blend the cutting-edge trends of psychology with the age-old wisdom and principles of the Christian tradition. Now, for our presenter, Rich Blue, as I mentioned before, he's the founder and clinical director of CLE. In addition to that, he's an ordained minister, founder of the pastoral training organization called Second Order Ministries. He's been practicing in the field of clinical psychology for more than 25 years and has a background as well in campus ministry, working with Campus Crusade for Christ. Rich brings truth, honesty, and grace to the forefront of his counseling practice and counseling style. And a little bit about our webinar today, how to get the most out of life. We're excited to have you here and to have you explore with us just what it takes to have more of the things that matter in your life. You know, these 6 things: connection, belonging, truth, relationship, spiritual connection, and I mean, there's more. The list could go on. And we're going to look at that through the lens of existentialism, systems thinking, Adlerian psychology. These are some of the schools of thought that are core to the model of growth here at CLE. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Rich, and he will tell you how to get the most out of life and live your life hungry for more. Take it away, Rich.
I'm so happy to be with you today, especially because the topic of our discussion is how to get the most out of our life. And I'm assuming that because you are with me today, that you, like me, are hungry for more. Who of us doesn't want more? Henry Ford is quoted as saying, "If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you always got." All of us recognize that making lasting and meaningful change is challenging. How many of us haven't gone on a diet or promised a New Year resolution or attempted to improve our fitness, and were able to sustain it for a time, but in the end we ended up going back to what we normally have done. And we recognize that change really involves intention, and it involves something very special if it's going to actually result in lasting transformation. It's much more difficult than most of us want to acknowledge. So short-term successes are easier to accomplish and maintain than long-term transformations. So one of the things that's really helped me in this ongoing battle in my life has been to understand that we live in systems. We can look at ourselves and understand ourselves, but in the long run, we can't think of ourselves as isolated individuals. We are all part of systems. Human systems includes all kinds of different things. So we have our bodies, we have our digestive system, our circulatory system, our respiratory system, our nervous system, and on. In our families are made up of systems. Murray Bowen was one of the founders and leaders of family systems therapy that just transformed the work of counseling. Instead of sending an individual, a child, to be fixed, what they recognized that if you were going to change an individual within a family system, you needed to work on the family as a whole. In our society, societal change happens as a result of dynamic and transformative principles that have been spoken and taught about by Claire Graves, Ken Wilber, Don Beck in Spiral Dynamics. But one of the principles of systems is that although they are all around us, we are blind to the systems of which we are a part. We need outside support. We need other people, other resources outside of the systems of which we are a part to be able to see them and make the necessary changes. Another characteristic of systems is that they resist change. Systems strive to maintain homeostasis. They are threatened by anything, regardless of its value, that wants to change the way things are. Systems promote unconsciousness, and they want to operate outside the realm of our awareness and our responsibility. Now, we are all part of spiritual systems as well. These systems may be made up of tradition and rituals, as many of us grew up with. They may be liturgical. They may be centered and founded around the scriptures and the study of a holy book like the Bible. They may center around an emphasis on charitable works and service for others. Jesus came to disrupt our systems. He taught in parables, challenging us to move outside that which we understood. Jesus routinely shook up the status quo. He wanted people to be uncomfortable in the way things had been. By making us uncomfortable to what was, he allowed us the opportunity to begin to see the systems of which we are a part. Jesus in the Beatitudes, one of his most famous teachings, turned the world of religion and spirituality upside down. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are they that mourn. Blessed are the meek. About these which hunger and thirst for righteousness, the merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemakers, those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. Wait a minute. We look at that list and we say, isn't it what we've grown up thinking? Blessed are the rich in spirit and the rich in wealth, those that are happy, that are powerful, that aren't hungry or thirsty, that don't need to be merciful. Jesus said it was actually the opposite. And Jesus taught us that many things were the opposite of what we thought they were in our given system. The first will be last, he said. The least are the greatest. Now, for us to be able to have the life we want to, the yearnings, the hungers that we've wanted, we have to not only recognize that we are a part of systems, and in order to change, we need to address the challenges that we face in the systems that we are a part. But how do we then transform those systems? Here at CLE, we're all about the work of empowering ourselves and others to live transformed lives, not just informed lives. We want them to be transformed, lives full of joy, of meaning, of purpose. Well, let me talk about some of the ABCs of living the abundant life that we believe that is possible for each of us. And the first is to seek the truth. The truth sets us free, Jesus taught. We can get free from the systems that bind us and blind us. Truth increases our awareness and our consciousness. It is our responsibility to seek truth wherever we can find it. Often our fears cause us to limit the sources of the truth that we are open to. We feel comfortable when we hear truth from our pastor, our clergy person, or someone from our school, or someone from our philosophical approach. Some people only trust their parents, their pastor, the church, or even the Bible. A suggestion for me to you is to avoid the temptation to predetermine the source of truth. I consider God to be the source ultimately of all truth, and the genesis of truth regardless of its source. In my life, people were one of the most overlooked well springs of truth. I had been taught to distrust myself. I had been taught to distrust my feelings. And instead, I lived with the belief that if I just could learn and be trained how to study the Bible, that through the Bible I could guarantee that God would give me only the truth that I needed. And as a result, I began to limit my life, limit my exposure, and my experience of the world, of other people, began to be narrowed as I tried to protect myself and insulate myself from infection from others. More truth in our lives will lead to more of a sense of being, a sense of yourself. you will know yourself and have a sense of who you are. Human experience is the fertile soil of life and one of the keys to transformation. Consciousness to the truth is the key. What I have found is that I want to emphasize, I want to focus on, and I want to expand my sense of being. And by being, what do I mean? Well, I mean being more alive. Aliveness means your heart is full. Your feelings are the language of your heart and soul. Focusing on your feelings, connecting with your heart in the here and now, whatever it is that you're experiencing and whatever it is that you're feeling. Aliveness leads to joy. And being more alive means being more aware and more conscious of what is happening within us in the moment. Being more engaged, connected with others, learning how to speak and express ourselves truthfully and authentically to one another. This requires courage. It is enhanced by training. And our challenge is to stop isolating and insulating ourselves from others because of a life ruled by fear, encouraging us to take more risks, build relationships that are mutually beneficial. Being more aware and conscious, we need to learn to see the truth about ourselves in the moment, to be more concerned with personal truth than propositional truth. Focus on experience in the here and now. Trust that within you, God lives, and within you, you have the resources to be able to learn how to discern what is true and helpful and what is not. Be less concerned about certain theological positions or even whether you can justify everything with spiritual truth. Trust that God is working through you to develop you and to bring you to that position of wholeness and joy. Look at how truth is being lived out day to day, moment by moment. Consciousness is the key. Jesus told us consistently in his teachings about paying attention to ourselves and trusting ourselves. How often did Jesus talk about taking the log out of our own eye before we take the speck out of the other? Seek the truth. The truth will set you free. All of us, our eyes are full of logs. We think we see others and we think we see them better than we see ourselves. It's a delusion. How can we accurately see what we're unwilling in another, what we're unwilling to see in ourselves? And we're locked in systems that want to inhibit our ability to see and understand more of what's happening in life. I'd like to switch gears a little bit and talk about some of my own personal experience, my path or my journey to more in my life. And I've entitled this section, Thinking the Unthinkable. I was a highly trained conservative Christian from a very rigid and narrow system. I graduated summa cum laude from one of the most prestigious evangelical seminaries in the country after having spent 10 years in ministry. I became a real student of the Bible and well practiced in dichotomous thinking. My world was very black and white. I believed in truth and non-truth, good and bad, right and wrong. It pretty much summarized where I'd been coming from. I also had been leading therapist for a number of years. I had a major system disruption when I decided to go back to graduate school and get another master's degree and a doctoral degree. I began studying transformational living, learning, and leadership. Leadership. I was in the process of this education. I was introduced to the thoughts of different great thinkers. I was primarily accustomed to listening to the teachings of Paul, of Peter, of John, and other well-respected theologians that followed the Christian tradition. But in my graduate studies, I was disturbed, disrupted, and stirred up. I was being asked to master philosophers and thinkers, many of whom were antagonistic to faith in Christianity. My previous education was excellent. I knew about these people. I'd studied them, but I'd studied them for the purpose of disproving them and demonstrating where they were inconsistent with the system of which I was a part. I not only had to read these people, I had to be able to understand them, articulate their positions, summarize them intelligently, and write about them in papers. The first person I remember standing out studying was Carl Rogers and humanism. Now you have to understand from where I'm coming from, humanism was considered like a disease, to some maybe even like an STD. But as I began to read Carl Rogers, something changed in my heart. I learned that he grew up in a Pentecostal home, but eventually moved away from his religious traditions, and yet maintained a deep love and acceptance for other people. He was driven by a desire to want everyone to be able to have the life they always wanted to live and live it to the fullest. He saw people, he listened to them, he believed in them, and he expected the best from them. I recognized that Carl Rogers really lived his life like Christ, even though outwardly he chose to not align himself with the Christian faith. I studied existentialism. Now I remembered existentialism as some sort of philosophical virus. I was very concerned. I didn't know what it was about, and as I began to read it, I found it to be very mysterious and difficult to understand. I really didn't know what I was reading, but all of a sudden, something began to happen inside of me, and I began to recognize that many of the values, once I got past some of the difficulties of initially understanding what these people were saying, was that experience in life was central. These people were committed and dedicated to encouraging others to live in the here and now and not be distracted in this life by preparing for a life in the future. They were angry and opposed to anything that encouraged people to check out and not live the most potent and powerful life possible. And they saw that the religious systems of the day were deadening people to their aliveness and deadening to the truth. And what I realized is that in many ways, the religious system that I had been involved with was training me to distrust my feelings and distrust my experience and limiting me to listening to truth that came from the source of Scripture itself. And in the process, what I was learning to do was trust the truth. Truth became something that I understood in a very different light. It was not so focused on being objective and outside, but personal and inside. I began to learn that I could be inspired by people that I would have never studied or considered before. Then I was asked to study several leading atheists, especially within the existential tradition. Jean-Paul Sartre. This was a guy that was very difficult to read. In fact, I must admit, most of my understanding of Sartre was through secondary sources, like Gordon Medlock and other men like him that had read and written about him. But one of the amazing things I took away from this avowed atheist was the concept of bad faith. And you know what bad faith was, according to Sartre? Bad faith was the unwillingness to live the most magnificent and powerful lives that each of us were capable of living. Bad faith was to not fulfill our life project. When you think about the teaching, scripture in the parable of the talents, man, that is not something that I should be afraid of. That is a truth of life. Then I studied Friedrich Nietzsche. Well, if you remember Nietzsche, Nietzsche is the guy that said God is dead. And yet, as I began to read, understand him, and began to see below the surface, even though I didn't agree with any of everything of any of these people that I studied. This man was fearlessly committed to the truth and responsibility. He's saying, don't numb out on God or religion or anything that takes you away from living powerfully in the here and now. He was speaking to me. I realized that I had allowed many of the teachings that I had received to limit me from being open and hungry and searching and seeking the ongoing revelation of God in the truth available to us in life. I was discovering that the core values in my life that were foundational ended up being things like truth, freedom, responsibility, choice, here and now experiences. And these were not exclusive to the Christian faith. In fact, every one of these decent human beings were preaching and teaching similar values. I was realizing that these are the bedrock values of the Center for Christian Life Enrichment, which we call CLE, of my life, of everything that I was doing and that was successfully helping people to grow in their love and acceptance of themselves and others. Now, in this process, there was some relief because was introduced to people like Soren Kierkegaard, a Christian existentialist. Two words that I never would have thought that could have gone together. I was so deeply inspired by his work, Fear and Trembling, where he does an in-depth analysis of the courageous faith of Abraham in dealing with the sacrifice of his son Isaac. I saw that Kierkegaard gave us the phrase, the leap of faith, and the encouragement to become a knight of faith. He was becoming a hero of mine. Paul Tillich was another man from the University of Chicago, right here in our backyard, another Christian existentialist, writing the seminal works on faith. The Courage to Be, the dynamics of faith. This man was amazing. And what I learned from Paul Tillich was this deep regard for our tendency to assume that we know God. And our tendency to assume that when you say God, or I use the word God, that we're actually talking about the same person, as if there is a unity of opinion. And what Tillich taught me was a deeper, much more expansive view of God as well as of myself. And he talked about the real God, the ultimate God, the divine transcendent other, being the God above gods. And the God, what I realized was that often the God that I said that I worshiped was the God of my own projections. And that something greater and more transcendent existed above whatever it was that I thought God should be. Now, the impact of this work in my life, having the courage to go beyond the system of which I was a part, impacted my depth. I felt that my roots were greatly deepened, that allowed me to be able to grow, to bear fruit, and to face the storms of life. It deepened my roots and understanding of the whys behind what I had been doing for years as a therapist. I knew the experientially based work and exercises and approach was powerful in terms of its results. Now I could understand why it worked. I deepened my confidence in myself and my understanding of who I was and how the world worked. What we did was often, at CLE, was often threatening because it was so non-conventional. It was challenging our unconscious systems. I had always felt insecure and defensive about what we were doing, and now I was able to understand through the truth of these men and women that I had studied at a much deeper level. I was strengthening my core. And it deepened my capacity to think critically and communicate with others convincingly. And what I realized was that consciousness is the key. Truth, yes, there's objective truth, there's spiritual truths, there's all kinds of truths. And yet the truth that challenges us today is, what's the truth about you? What is the truth about me? Who am I right now in this moment? What do I think? How do I feel? What's most important to me? I became a student of truth, of life, of faith, of love, and the infinite. And our invitation to you today is that you would join us in this journey. Expand your awareness and your understanding of yourself, of who you are, of what you feel, of where you've been. Gain the gifts, gain the strengths, gain the skills, the tools to be able to live the life you were meant to live. I believe that each of us has been given these gifts within us. And God wants to work with us to be able to empower us to fulfill our life projects, to fulfill the purposes for which He has created us. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for joining us in this journey of faith. Please watch for our upcoming webinars. Gabriela Cantu will be speaking on systems and families, and we would love to have you join us for that. Please, again, feel free to contact us. If you would like to talk with us further, we would love to make a session. In fact, we're offering a 30-minute complimentary session with me or one of my staff members to see if we could support you in living the lives that you want to live.